Well, I make that 2 minutes past, and I think we should get cracking. So thank you so much for taking time out. My name is Kerry Nutley, and I'm the HCM Strategy Director for the UK and Northern Europe here at Oracle. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by Brian O'Donoghue, who's the Director of People at Marie Curie. Also by Tom Holmes, who's the Director of Veran Performance, and my colleague and amazing strategist, Yazad Dalal, who actually looks at our senior strategy and strategy across EMEA at Oracle as well. We're very much here today to talk about the kind of experience we're seeing in the market with customers and from ourselves, and also the Marie Curie experience of looking at transformation and why we're seeing a lot of customers speaking to us about why HR and finance should be joining together, looking at data, looking at the experience, and how to get some fantastic top tips from the expertise of our panel today. So before I kick off, this meeting is being recorded for a playback. We will be running a Q&A, and obviously we will cease recording at that time. If you do have some questions, we have the amazing Abby Taylor in the background looking after the chat function, but also if you'd like to chat in the Q&A, we will have time for those at the end. So with that, I think I'm going to get started. So let me stop sharing the screen and let's have a look at the fantastic panel in all their glory at 9 o'clock this morning. Welcome. So I'm going to kick off straight away, and Tom, I'm going to come to you. So your role at Veran is really about helping customers and advising them on their transformation. So you're going to be seeing a lot of people go through that early design period and design phase. But what insight would you see from the work that you've done and your kind of wealth of experience in terms of what maybe some customers might overlook when they consider an HR transformation that you'd want to give people as advice?
The real question and the real benefit from any form of transformation is significant and long-lasting business change, and actually defining that place, that position which the business as a whole needs to be. What are our objectives over the next 5 years, 3 years, whatever the period, in all its glory? It covers HR, it covers finance, it covers front office, it covers all of the dimensions about how this business needs to be different from how it is now. And then defining that guiding star of where it is we need to get to, and then breaking that down into the different elements. This is the front office change. This is the strategic workforce planning change. This is the change we need in understanding our financial performance and how that's going. This is the sales change. This is the service change we need to provide. And then our skill, what we do, and with clients who are really successful, is breaking down those objectives into, therefore, what is the detailed organizational change we need? What is the detailed technology change and new tools we need to deliver that? How does finance, HR, and the other areas, marketing and sales, work together on a single set of data? We're a strong believer that technology embeds organizations who work as a single whole with a single set of outcomes which are integrated across all of their different functions. And we actually believe that technology brings something really important to that. It is the enabler to allow those different parts of the business to come together. So in simple terms, in answer to your question, Kerry, it is actually by setting that guiding star as to where we need to get, breaking it down into a plan covering all of those different dimensions, from technology to organizational change to different behaviors and cultural ways of working, and then breaking that into a detailed plan. 10 years ago, everyone was about implementing technology, getting the system live, all this kind of stuff. It's not like that anymore. We actually want so much more out of our technology to deliver real changing business outcomes. And the very best of us, the very best of the organizations who are getting there, who are really progressing, define that journey up front and then rigorously stick to it to deliver what they said they were going to do.
I think that's really interesting, because if you think about it, we often, as organisations, come up with a purpose, don't we? It's a purpose, it's on a plan on a page, it's our strategy. And I think what we're saying here, Tom, is it's about taking that purpose, taking that North Star about what you stand for as an organisation, and translating that in terms of how the technology will enable, in essence, kind of culture to make it happen. Something that I think we did historically when we talked about customer experience. And now what we're really seeing is technology enabling a kind of employee experience and translating that through, because, you know, I think technology is becoming, for many organizations, how we interact with data, with sending emails, you know, communicating on the phone. It's everywhere, isn't it?
Absolutely. And delivering a single business outcome is so rarely technology alone. It is technology, it is colleagues working together more closely. It's colleagues understanding what the dimensions of delivering that outcome are, really understanding and being able to analyze the purpose of their business and how they fit within it. And then we get technology and other programs which are truly successful because they are seen as relevant to the business and driving real growth and improvement to the services we provide.
And that technology and people part, I think we'd all agree, is really important. It can't just be technology by itself. It has to be that integration. So yeah, couldn't agree with you more. So I'm going to go to Brian now. Brian from Marie Curie. You've just done a massive HR and finance transformation. And we kind of caught up before today. We were having a chat. And one thing that really resonated to me in your story, which I'm going to ask you to kind of cover with the participants today, is that you kind of went down the, I need to do an HR transformation route, and then you kind of started thinking about it. And the journey that you told me was that you kind of got to this acknowledgement that data was king, and that actually it wasn't just HR data, but to optimize the outcome, you needed to bring your finance colleagues with you, because that interconnectivity of finance and HR was so important. Can you just tell us a bit about your journey and what you went through?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, as you said, I mean, when we started, maybe, oh gosh, about 3 or maybe slightly even longer than that years ago, we were looking at how we transform HR. One of the things that I was focused on was changing the way that we operate within the HR function and using systems and information in a different way, but also enabling people to use the systems rather than kind of having to use HR as this kind of conduit into accessing processes or whatever, just enabling people to self-serve. And we started that journey in terms of looking at how we would do that, and it was very evident from the beginning that technology was going to be one of the enablers. Finance, we're also looking at how they kind of improve their transactional activity as well, but hadn't really been focused on systems or whatever. They had systems they thought they worked okay, but they really just worked okay for finance. And as we started talking about how things, I guess our vision for the future around back office, it became evident that actually finance and HR really needed to be using the same data and be on the same journey, because I mean, Marie Curie is a people organization. The majority of our spend is on our nurses, our HCAs, the people within our organization that deliver services. So most of the cost drivers that actually finance were interested in, or it was around people. And we had data in the people systems, we got data in the finance systems, but they never really mixed. So trying to do things like workforce planning or modeling around scenarios in terms of how you might want to change the shape of things was impossible. The ability for people to really drill down into information in terms of costs around their own departments, for example, whether that's a director or a team leader or a manager or whatever, was impossible. You couldn't really tie up the information that people had around what they thought their budgets were from an establishment point of view, for example, versus actual running cost from a finance point of view if you're carrying vacancies or whatever. You could never really marry the two up. So it really became evident, I think, fairly early on that actually the data, it should be shared between both kind of areas. It is the same people that we're dealing with, the same costs, the same data. So so that's when we started looking and working much more closely together in terms of the transformation of back office, both from a finance and a people point of view, and started looking at kind of platforms and systems that could deliver that, rather than trying to think about how do we do things just for ourselves in our own area. So it just made a lot of sense to us.
And I think you're so right. I mean, I remember when I was an HR business partner, and every month you would have to go through your budget and your head count. And, you know, you'd get your report from finance and it never matched yours, and you'd have to sit there, the two of you, and do that. And I think, you know, not having to take, if you could take that admin task out for every HR business partner or finance manager, you know, think of the admin time that would be saved, that you could then apply it to more value-added activities, talking people in the organisation, helping, thinking about strategy. I completely hear you. Yeah. So, you know, I think we've all been there at some point in our careers.
And also, I mean, you kind of, you take away some of the administration piece, which is great, but the added benefit then is being able to draw real insight from the data that you're using. So in the past, you kind of, are you hitting budget? Yes, tick. But actually, you need to look into the data and see what it's telling you about the way the organization is moving. So your information about how people are progressing within the organization, and that's what we aspire to be able to kind of use the information in a much more insightful way to be able to really drive talent and drive those sides of things and make, I say, insightful decisions about people and costs, rather than just kind of meeting a kind of target that was set 18 months ago, maybe from a point of view of budgets and finance.
So I think what we're hearing, Brian, is it's the kind of one source data truth, but also the accessibility of that data. Is that kind of what you were saying? Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of our kind of principles as we started this journey was we wanted to be much more transparent in terms of data. So actually having data available to everybody, kind of democratizing data to some extent, is really important. Because yeah, previously it was just so hard to pull reports and pull information. It's old, it's not really timely, and it was really the preserve of a few people who had access to particular information or reporting. Where we want to get to is any manager can go in and have live information and has it across a range of areas, so that actually the information is available for all to see, so people can make decisions at the right level rather than kind of things bouncing up and down the organization, which traditionally is what happened.
That must be giving some guys in your organisation some real autonomy as well. It's nothing more frustrating, isn't there, when you've got to keep going up and up the organisation to get sign off. So
absolutely, yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That's a really good insight there. Yes, I'm going to come to you now. So obviously Brian isn't alone looking at basically integrating his HR and finance platforms, and you have a wealth of experience working with customers across EMEA. What would you say are the top tips to make sure that that integration of those two back office platforms go well?
Sure. Well, I think if we look at the other side of the picture, what is life like when you don't have your HR and finance integrated? Arthur C. Clarke has a great quote. He says, I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Which sounds very grandiose, right? But I think what that means is, in a way, our expectations now are so high because all of us have such a significant exposure to technology in our personal lives, in our consumer lives, that it sets some pretty significant expectations, not just for organizations, but for people. So, you know, we believe that whatever we think our technology can do, it should just be able to do. You know, I have a phone with a camera in it. What should it be able to do because of that? I have a phone that I can talk to with my voice. What should it be able to do? If my calendar and my email are on the same device, how can that help me? But I think it also makes us impatient when we're faced with obstacles that don't make sense in that technology context. In other words, if I know that there's data in this company on HR, and I know that there's data in this company related to my people, but sitting in finance, logically, it should just be able to talk to each other. And when it doesn't, then that becomes very frustrating. Our tolerance for that inefficiency, I think, is decreasing very rapidly, which means that when we encounter inefficiency in our organization, it becomes intolerable. And I don't think that's good for us as people. It's certainly not good for an organization. One of the most famous probably questions that a CEO or the leader of an organization can ask their head of HR or their head of finance is, how many people do I have? And how much am I paying them? And that's a question that I think every HR software has tried to answer for the last 40 years. And the challenge with it is, I remember running a small business, nothing the size of a Marie Curie or certainly not an Oracle, where my CEO would ask me this once a quarter. And my response was 7 sentences long. Well, I've got 35 people in this office here, but that's on this date. I know your board meeting is 2 weeks from now. By that date, I will have termed 3 people and we'll have just made offers to 4 with 1 onboarding, but there's that 1 lady going on maternity leave. So I've got 7 answers for you. And by the way, in terms of how much I'm paying them, I've got 7 answers for you as well. That's really frustrating for everyone. All we're trying to do is tell the people above us a single number. So it's a tiny example, but I think it's really significant because without a clear connection between your HR system, your finance system, in other words, a complete back office, you don't have insight across your business. You're kind of driving with one eye shut or partially shut. I think the other element of that is the effort required to integrate different systems has a cost, a money cost, it has a people cost, and it has risk. It has potential for data inconsistency. And I think if you are a governmental organization, if you are a nonprofit like Marie Curie, that's massively critical. Every penny that you have to spend was sacrificed by someone else, either through taxes or through a donation. The respect that you have to have for your funds when you're in a nonprofit organization, and Brian, I apologize, I'm speaking on your behalf, but is significantly higher perhaps than in the private sector, where you just assume, oh, we've got to spend that money in order to make that happen. Our tolerance is even lower when we recognize where that money has come from. And I think from a risk perspective, I think it goes without saying, but we have certain assumptions now that our systems shouldn't fail. And yet we know that there's a high risk of that. And so when you have multiple systems, not only are they not talking to each other in the way that you would ideally want them to, but now you've got multiple access points. How do you control that? How do you maintain, in mundane terms, a single sign-on? How do you provision that in a way that feels like a single experience? So I think these are all the pain points that organizations are trying to solve by having a unified system. And these are the risks that they will have, both from a data and security perspective, but also in terms of tolerance. We don't want to provide an intolerable experience to our people.
I think that's really lovely, because that hooks back to me on kind of what Tom was saying around kind of purpose and integration and that kind of end-to-end kind of golden thread. So what Tom was kind of saying at the start of the call was it's, something that organizations are doing. And I think, Yaz, what you're saying is from a behavioral perspective and an expectations, it's something it's not a nice to have, it's actually a must have, because that's the expectations of employees at the moment. So I think it's quite lovely that we've gone from a business objective to a kind of human behavioral point as well. So that's a fantastic link there. And I think just Tom, on that, I mean, you're working with clients all the time through the pandemic. Are you seeing kind of any of your clients kind of respond better through having this golden thread of data, of purpose, of understanding behaviours that you could kind of share with the listeners today?
I mean, absolutely. As you know, I talk to a HRD of a large firm every week and have done throughout the pandemic. So I've done 28 different broadcasts talking about their experience. And of course, outside of even specific sector business conditions, some of them have found it easier than others. And I kind of can draw some threads as to what's really been driving that success, and then what that success looks like. I mean, one of the most interesting feature to me of the pandemic is that the demands on our teams, and particularly on our back office teams, have changed from day to day, from week to week, and from month to month in radical manners. So we've been asked to do stuff and change direction at speeds which we've never seen before. I know that if I'd said to Marie Curie 3 years ago that all of their back office staff would be working at home and that that's going to work really well, Brian would have told me that's a 5-year journey or something like that. Brian, I'm sure you'd have done it faster, but you know what I mean. It would be an incredibly long journey. But we did that. Most of our successful businesses did that in weeks and really successfully. Now, I think that has driven a level of confidence in our teams that they can do things. So the most successful organizations have developed increased confidence that their teams can do stuff. And actually it's inner confidence as well. You know, we all know the most successful businesses in the world are the ones which are the most confident about the services they provide, the quality of those services, the maybe the price or whatever in the private sector, but in the public sector it's the quality and the type of service. And that confidence in the best organizations and for many of our team members have grown. At the same time, we've seen a greater tolerance, I think, during the crisis. So in the old days, you know, Kerry, you come from an HR background, you know everything had to be 100% right before you do anything. You know, a new leave timetable or out of hours method, it took 6 months of analysis before you could put it in. And that's because we were scared of our businesses. We were scared of working with our colleagues. We believed their tolerance for something not being 100% right the first time was 0. But that's not true. We've discovered during the pandemic, and because of the strictures which so many of our businesses have been through, that actually our businesses are tolerant and sympathetic towards the challenges which we face in our parts of the business. And I think if we can, the strongest businesses are identifying that confidence and that greater level of tolerance and are building upon it to make their businesses more successful and trying to retain those dimensions for what is going to continue to be a challenging period over the next few years.
I was going to ask you, Tom, because that's just kind of triggered something in my mind. And I'm thinking about some other conversations that we saw where, we work obviously with multiple companies, and we saw kind of CEOs using the time that they weren't traveling to, integrate more within the business, speak to every level. And it became very much kind of open doors because we were all working at home, children would come in, dogs would bark, we just got on with it. And so do you think, as well as kind of this sharing and the acceptance of moving of change with speed, is some of that also about, functional barriers? You're in finance, I'm in HR, and there's always kind of this Mars and Venus type of relationship. It's actually kind of like, we just need to get on. We just need to respond to this. Are you seeing that as well in terms of behavior as well as kind of process?
No, you're absolutely right. There's confidence and tolerance works in many directions. One of those directions is the sympathy we have for our other colleagues and understanding of what position they're in. And actually working more closely with them. I mean, the way I see it is that the whole of the business community and nearly every business has been through an exercise of turning their business into an agile business over the past 9 months. All our targets, most of our targets have been 2-week targets, 3-week targets, 4-week targets. And to be honest, for many of us who have worked many years in the back office particularly, that's no bad thing. There are some things which we can take positives out of the crisis with. We are working in a more agile mechanism, changing towards other people's conditions and having sympathy for that, setting targets which we don't necessarily have to make every single time, but at least we're on a journey towards them, I think are all exciting potential outcomes from the torrid times we've had.
I think you're right. Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I am going to have to come back to Brian, because obviously Yaz was there talking about not-for-profit, and I think obviously we need to come back to Brian and ask you about this. So, you know, you've been in this kind of a very dynamic situation because you are not-for-profit. Like, unlike many organisations, you haven't had that kind of buffer in essence of a kind of profit line. How have you kind of dealt with that through the situation and the disruption we've had, and kind of what top tips, by not having that, by that being your business as usual, could you give kind of maybe commercial organisations that are listening today?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly been a challenging 12 months for the charity sector. As you say, we don't have buffer. I mean, we have some reserves which we're required to by the charity kind of commission, but we don't have big funds to fall back on when things get tough. I mean, I think, touching on what Tom said, I mean, that one of the tips, it's not a secret, one of the things that we've had to rely on is being agile. So we've had to pivot really quickly. When the crisis first hit, people shifted entirely what their focus was. So people within our strategy team, for example, kind of took their eyes away from strategy and just focused on how do we get PPE to all of our staff on the frontline services. And it was a real challenge at the beginning because there was a shortage of PPE across the country. So people working in totally different areas, entirely shifting their focus in a matter of days, and just shifting around and being very flexible in terms of how we work. Also, I guess taking advantage of the opportunities that are there. I mean, obviously one of our big kind of part of our organization is retail, and that's shut down overnight almost. And people were very understanding. People, I guess, understand that the cause and really are willing to do whatever is necessary to make sure that the organization survives and is focused on delivering benefit for our beneficiaries. So people were very understanding about needing to move into furlough, and so that kind of all in it together kind of approach really helps, and that's one of the things, I guess, one of the strengths of a charity organization. But the other areas were kind of things like shifting very quickly to a digital and online platform. We had a bit of an advantage, I guess, in terms of we'd started using Teams as a platform probably 6 months before the pandemic kind of hit. So some of our people were starting to get used to working a different way, and we were trying to do more meetings online and things, although nothing to the extent that we have done for the past 12 months. So we moved very quickly onto an online platform and people working from home. But from a fundraising point of view, obviously that another big hit is we couldn't obviously have people out on the front line and collecting with their shaking cans and asking people to donate. When the pandemic hit, we were right in the middle of our Great Daffodil Appeal, which goes on from the end of February through into April. And we were hit massively because our biggest kind of fundraising event of the year was suddenly cancelled because we couldn't go out and do that kind of face-to-face interaction. So fundraising had to swiftly just change entirely their approach and how they interact with supporters and people who normally provide those funds. And I guess a lot of that has been around how we engage with people and continue that communication. So whether that's our internal people that are on furlough, whether it's people that have shifted in terms of the job that they're doing and how they're supporting the organization, to our supporters and organizations that would normally be supporting Marie Curie, it is really kind of stepping up that level of engagement and communication using tools like Zoom and Teams and things to make sure that we can maintain that level of contact. And we're fortunate in terms of, I mean, Marie Curie is a really well-respected charity and organization, and people wanted to help out when a kind of shout for help went out, and we launched an emergency appeal to try and fill the gap between the Great Daffodil Appeal and where we were left. So I think it is that agility, that ability to be flexible in how we do things. I think the willingness of everybody within the organization to be flexible and change what they're doing in a really quick way. This sense of being in it together and supporting each other was really important. So that broad engagement across the organization is hugely important to kind of survive in times like this. And interesting, our engagement numbers haven't particularly fallen throughout the pandemic, so people are still highly engaged despite having to work in totally different ways with very different pressures, particularly people who are used to working in an office environment and now stuck in a room for kind of 7 days a week and never seeing the outside. So it has been an interesting, a difficult time at times, because obviously it is, we're seeing hugely different pressures, I guess, on people as they try to cope with a huge amount of change, whilst at the same time supporting an organization as it kind of tries to maintain its financial stability and deliver services that are frontline services to people who are desperately in need of that support. So I think that kind of it does come down to things like agility, engagement, communication, and flexibility. Those are the kind of key things, and I'm sure lots of commercial organizations have them, but I guess we are fortunate in terms of we've got a really clear cause, and it's a little bit easier, I guess, to kind of have everybody focused on our North Star, and all decisions, anything that we want to do around spend has to be, is it going to support the North Star? And it's very clear whether it does or doesn't, I guess. And so it makes some of the decision making around things that are a priority just that little bit easier.
Thank you for that, Brian. And also, just obviously, thank you to Marie Curie and all your staff, and obviously all the frontline staff that have kind of helped, given the support to everybody that has either been ill or had loved ones or cared. And I know obviously you're supporting a lot of cancer patients, but I know a lot of people have been supported, and you really are a blessing when you're needed as a service. So thank you. And obviously yourself as a leadership team, maybe not at the forefront, but being agile and creative to think about how we can keep such critical services that you offer when people are in need up and running. So thank you for that. And it's lovely to hear that actually it is about people and it's about purpose. So with that, I'm not going to let you off the hook, because I'm going to ask you a personal leadership question now. And this will be my last question before we go into Q&A. So if people do have Q&As, please do type them in. But leadership is so important. And Brian just, I think, summarised that beautifully in terms of the Marie Curie experience. So what would you say individually was one of your best deliverables as a leader to your team or your organisation that you would say you're currently quite proud of as working through the kind of pandemic and disruption? I think, Yaz, I'm going to start with you.
Thanks, Kerry. Well, maybe I'll share two perspectives. You know, from an Oracle perspective, and I know your question is about us personally, but from an Oracle perspective, you know, you were asking what are we most proud of. I work at a very large company. You and I work at a very large company. It's been around for a long time, and I think sometimes when you have a large successful company, you sometimes run the risk of seeming a little bit distant. And one of the things I was really proud of in the beginning of this whole pandemic was we actually changed tack quite a bit and said, rather than trying to sell to customers in a time of crisis, let's figure out how to help. And we were hearing that from so many CHROs whom we work with. Their main mandate was, how do I take care of my people? And so I was quite proud of the fact that as a company, we tried to figure out how to support them in that mission, providing, for instance, a health and safety application for free so that they could track who has COVID in their organizations and who has symptoms and take care of their people, but also helping organizations survive. We had a major airline in the UK that we were able to help with payment terms so that they could meet their financial obligations and stay in the air. But on a personal level, I think recognizing that every situation is different for our employees was very important. We have people in any organization, you have people who have family, they don't have family. If they're married, they might both be working or not. They might have kids or not. There might be elderly people that they have to take care of. They might be single in the middle of a city that's completely locked down. And what was interesting is I have two very young kids, but ironically, I saw that some of the families with the older kids, the adult kids, actually had more issues sometimes, because at least when your kids are under 10, they don't have a choice. They'll eventually listen to everything you tell them. Maybe not so true of teenagers. We had employees whose kids were going out and getting sick and then coming home, and now everyone is in quarantine. And I think also we are geographically distributed. So we had multiple rules, different people living in different countries. One of my colleagues in my team is in the south of France, which sounds nice. But yesterday she's telling me they've just introduced, not only do they have an evening curfew, but now they have a weekend curfew. So again, I think having a lot of empathy, which we all know is important, but also not making any assumptions is really important. And then, like Brian and Tom were saying earlier, granting the freedom to be human, having the kids on calls, interrupting a really important meeting because Amazon is at the door, which I think we can all empathize with as well, but that's really important. You have to drop what you're doing and go respond to that. But the last thing I will say, which is something that I've always believed in, but have never had an opportunity like this to put into practice, has been the opportunity to talk more and more often with our people. I think when structures fall away, there's an opportunity for more intimacy. And I think in particular, video is extremely interesting for that purpose. And we're talking about technology in this discussion. I think it's probably the beginning of a really interesting relationship that we all need to develop with video, with cameras. The two things that I share with a lot of folks, and then I will pause. But when you are on camera, you actually have an opportunity for a deeper connection, because in human interaction, what's so important is reading body language. I can, for instance, stare very intently at Tom's face through video without making him feel uncomfortable because he doesn't actually feel it.
And I don't know, Tom, you feel it? I don't know. We should ask Tom, right?
and that helps me sort of see him more, if that makes sense, and be more attuned to him. And then conversely, we're able to have a deeper connection sometimes if we know how to use the camera. So for instance, if we want to be taken more seriously, or we're trying to get a point across, it may sound very weird, but making hard eye contact with the lens suddenly makes it feel much more direct. The proximity to the lens, how we use our hands with that lens, suddenly can be very impactful. So I think there's a lot for us to learn. I'm not an expert, but I think recognizing that everyone's situation is different and figuring out how to leverage the tools that we have to actually improve in a time of crisis has been a big learning for me.
Excellent. I think on that one we have to go to Tom in terms of his pieces, because I think he might, or maybe we give Tom a kind of minute to kind of, appreciate that he's had big Yaz looking at him down the lens there.
In answer to your question of what is the key beneficial change which we've made during the period, I mean, it's been a tough time for our business and for everyone else's business. So there's been pretty difficult. But the key thing is that I have got rid of all long-term objectives in our business. We only have short-term objectives now. The team and my colleagues find them more achievable, more understandable, and easier to test themselves against. So we have removed any long-term objectives. There's no objective for our business longer than 2 or 3 weeks away. And the increase in tangibility that provides for our colleagues in actually achieving that has been phenomenal. And it's been a really wonderful change, because, in a world in which control is taken away from you, reducing the time frames so that there are outcomes that you can control has been absolutely wonderful change.
Excellent. That does sound like a great plan to keep things focused and to respond, because I think, you know, once we get that achievement, obviously that helps with our motivation as well. So that sounds like a great top tip. Thank you, Tom. And last but not least, Brian, over to you.
Yeah, it's difficult. I was thinking about this one. I think probably the biggest change or achievement has been around our willingness to take opportunities that have presented themselves. And I don't take responsibility for that. I've got a fantastic leadership team who kind of really stepped up when the pandemic hit. HR has probably never been as in the kind of focus and in the limelight as it has been during the pandemic, when we've had to react really quickly in terms of developing policy on the hoof, when furlough was introduced and things like that. It's something we'd never heard of within the UK. So we've changed really rapidly, and HR has been central to a lot of the stuff that's gone on within the past 12 months, and has really taken the opportunity to kind of stand up and lead in the organization. So I think that's been fantastic from an HR point of view, and I think that probably is mirrored across a lot of organizations. But also, I guess we were in the middle of, well, we were just starting implementation of Oracle. Back in January, we had our first kind of kickoff sessions doing discovery and things like that, and we had all of these great plans around face-to-face meetings and bringing people from all over the country to be engaged in sessions around how we design the new platform, and suddenly that had to switch onto this kind of online environment, and nobody had done that before. I mean, our implementation partners in Amos hadn't done that. We hadn't done anything like that, and we managed to make that successful really quickly. So that was, I think, something that we're really proud of as an organization and as a team within people transformation. But I think also just touching on what Yaz was saying, I think the sense of actually connection that we've managed to maintain. So I think we've managed to keep the sense of team alive, even though we're only meeting virtually. And actually it has improved in some sense, because we're geographically dispersed as well. So we've got people up in the HR team up in Scotland, in Newcastle, in Wales, and wherever. And actually, in some ways, it's made it even easier to engage with people that in the past would have seen fairly seldomly. So now we can just have a call, and actually you're face to face, or you can have a meeting, and you have all these people from right across the country that in the past we'd have said, oh, we'll need to come to London for a meeting, and or we need to go to Scotland, or whatever it might be. But now we can have this connection much more easily, and develop a sense of team, even when that team is geographically dispersed. We had plans around kind of creating, we've created a people operations hub as part of our people transformation. When we were designing that, it was the idea was that would be in a single place. It would be people co-located and working together. But actually, we see we don't need to do that now. We can have talent from all over the country as part of this virtual hub, and that's a fantastic opportunity in terms of just widening our talent pools and being able to do things in a much better way. So I think what I guess I'm proud of is really about the opportunities that we've taken from what has been a really difficult year in difficult circumstances, but actually turning some of those things to our advantage and using them in a positive way.